Welcome to Toronto the Politics, the show. My name is Christopher Chesson. I'm Toronto the Politics, the show, the host. We have a conversation on rental housing and Mark Carney's recent announcement on a program to, possibly assist in the building of more rental housing. I have on here today Bruno Dobrusin and Sharlene Henry, the co-chairs of the Toronto Tenant Union, an organization that was recently founded to help protect tenant rights. Bruno and Sharlene, thanks so much for joining the show today. Bruno, how's your day been going?
It's been going great. Yeah, thanks for having us. I've followed a bit of the show lately, so it's exciting to be here.
Yeah, thanks. I love you got great neighborhoods in the background of your shot. Sorry to reveal. You also have some good foliage. The first segment of the show is always just reviewing people's backgrounds, and I think you've got an A+ one, Bruno. And
Thank
Sharlene,
you.
You're carrying your weight too. I love that little teal paint situation you got back there. Charlene, how's your day been going?
My day's been all right. Started early, but it's a good day so far. The sun is shining.
Yeah, you've got kids, right, Charlene? How old are they?
I have a 13-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 7-year-old. So life is busy.
I bet. I can only imagine. Well, thanks so much for joining the show today. So on August 5th, Carney and Olivia Chow announced up to $2.7 billion in federal support for more than 5,600 Toronto rental homes. The aim is to support about 4,500 homes in their construction in Toronto. Bruno, I'm wondering if you could maybe give your initial reflection on that announcement. What do you think are the strengths, and maybe what do you think are the weaknesses of it?
Okay, maybe let's start with the strengths so that we're not the party pooper so early on. I would say the strength is that a third of the funding announced is for non-market housing in general, right? So that's, to us, it's an important part. Basically, our argument is that we are in this crisis because we've left it up to the market, and the market is failing at it. Has failed for decades now. So we need more non-market housing. And a third of the units are going to be built. They bunch them all together in this multi-non-market category, but it actually means different things. So supportive housing, which is often for folks who are living in the streets, to have a place to live that also has other conditions that helps them to survive from the context they come from. It also mentions funding for nonprofits to build housing and rent control. So they kind of bunch it all together in the 1/3, which, okay, better than nothing. It's good. And it's also, I think, good that they are responding in some ways to the criticisms that we just cannot always throw money into private developers. So that's where they started the announcement.
Sharlene, could you maybe talk about how this fits into the announcement they had made in BC a couple of months ago and some of the criticism that they received there?
Well, there was not a lot of rent-controlled units. So rent control is always a good thing for folks. The folks that we assist in our tenant union are folks who really depend on a controlled market and a market that is stable. And what we found across this country in the work that we do, and we speak to other tenant unions, that the market is not stable for many people. We know that we're in a cost of living crisis in Canada. Prices are going up, but folks' wages are not going up. So we really want to emphasize that, the announcements can be made, but when the average Canadian is facing, do I pay my rent or do I eat? How does these announcements help people?
Bruno, maybe could you tell me a bit more about the Toronto Tenant Union? It's a new organization. When did you get the idea to start that as a union, and how do you think it's going so far?
Well, yeah, we started in April of this year as a merger of very different organizations that were working on housing. Sharlene and myself come from the York South-Western Tenant Union, which is a tenant union in Northwest Toronto that started around 2018, 2019. And that I think had a period of a lot of growth. Sharlene's building was on one of the longest and largest rent strikes the city has seen. So from that moment on, we started getting approached by many tenants across the city that wanted to organize in their buildings or in their location as well. So eventually, we decided to connect with other organizations like Climate Justice Toronto, who were doing climate organizing until they switched to housing organizing, and decided, why don't we merge it all together and have a citywide tenant union so that any tenant in the city can have an organization that they belong to, they can connect with, and that can be there in their neighborhood regardless where they are in the city.
Bruno, when you consider the current state of the housing crisis that we are in, how much of that do you think is due to developers? Like, where do you think they fit into this whole dynamic?
they're the key drivers. And this is why this idea that we have a housing crisis that has almost no actors that are to blame and it just happens, it's crazy because the crisis is on tenants and on people, but there is companies that are making quite a hefty profit out of this. They're not in crisis and they actually have an intention of perpetuating the situation because they're making a lot of money as part of it. And I think the announcements like the one that Carney made just reinforce that. I always say, I think we would not get out of the climate crisis funding Shell or Sancor. Why are we trying to get out of a housing crisis funding the companies that are leading us into it, right?
Sharlene, what do you think is the role of the tenant union in order to put forward better ideas and better policies? How can organizations like the Toronto Tenant Union help?
Well, it's about education. So a lot of the average tenant that we come across doesn't really know their rights. They don't know what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do. They don't understand what the simple forms they receive from their landlord mean to them. And it's usually in a state of crisis that folks contact us. We want to educate them just to know their basic rights. Know that your landlord can't give you notice today at 5 o'clock to enter your unit tomorrow at 9 a.m. They need to give you 24 hours written notice. Those are basic rights of tenants, and the average tenant in Toronto doesn't know that. So organizations like ours are helping tenants know their rights. And from there, we can keep educating to empower. So Bruno spoke earlier a little bit about the rent strike at my building here at 33 King Street. Not only was it successful, but it empowered folks who've lived here, some for a little bit of time, some for a very long time, to take ownership of how they live. Basically, that was the learning point and curve for us. People were empowered to stand up and advocate for their home, which is a human right, and it's a basic need for everyone living in this city. So folks like us are there to help educate, and I think education is the biggest key to empowering people. It can be empowering that 18-year-old who's moving into their first apartment to empowering a retiree who's lived in an apartment most of their working life and in their retirement and was just getting by.
Sharlene, can you tell me more about that rent strike? How was that initially organized?
It was a lot of work. It didn't happen overnight. It was years of us pushing back against our above guideline increases in our building. At one point, our building had the most above guideline increases over a certain amount of years. And through being very public on social media and pushing back in our neighborhood against these above guideline increases, we realized that we weren't in control of the narrative above guideline increases, that they would keep coming. And we would fight back, push back, organize, door knock, talk to our neighbors about it. And eventually we won back some money on an above guideline increase, but never physically felt it. So tenants became frustrated. And through that frustration, we organized to keep pushing back, and eventually we ended up on a rent strike, which was the longest one in the history of our city.
And how did that turn out?
Well, we won, and I must say I still live in my home. A lot of people at the time when we were on rent strike were like, aren't you afraid they kick you out? There is a legal process to evict people from their homes. That did not happen for us, but we were victorious. And I think the biggest lesson was we stayed united. We're a very big building, 27 stories, hundreds of units, and we stayed united as a collective pushing back against our landlord. And that, I think that's even though we won, that's the biggest victory, because we know that collective action really does work. We were proof of that. We know that in a labor union, collective action is how they get results, but our collective action was for our homes, for where we lay our heads.
Bruno, do you think that more rent strikes are necessary in Toronto?
Yes, definitely. For many reasons beyond what Sharlene stated, it's I think that sense of getting back control in tenants' lives, which is really important at a time when people have precarious jobs. They have precarious communities many times because people move in and out all the time. Yeah, rent strikes are a really powerful tool. They're really difficult because getting people to not pay rent collectively at the same time, it's a difficult decision. Most people, the vast majority of people, want to pay rent on time and they know there's a lot at stake. But I think it's a tool that we need to propagate even more to push back against some of these landlords and developers that are controlling so much of what we do. Just to give you an example but one thing in Sharlene's building's case that is interesting connected to the announcement from Carney, this landlord is also a developer that has received a lot of these federal subsidies already to develop other buildings, or even a lot of the repairs that they did on Sharlene's building were funded by the federal government or the CMHC, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. So you already see that contradiction right in one building. But you have other situations where the landlord is a company that also owns hotels, and you have hotel workers who have the same boss as their landlord. So these are corporations that have so much control over people's lives, and a rent strike is really an effective way to push back. You might not always win everything you want, but just on the symbolic, powerful gesture of saying enough is enough, definitely something we need to expand.
Bruno, are there any other tools that, renters or maybe, tenant collectives can be making use of to expand their rights?
There are many tools. I would say the main one is always door knocking your neighbors. I don't think there's any kind of magic potion to success that it doesn't go through. I went and door knocked my neighbors, because that actually breaks a whole system of isolation that we have, where people spend most of their time also online, watching series, we all do, etc. But going and knocking on your neighbors' doors is probably the most powerful tool you can have. Also because you're building a collective and you're breaking people's isolation and this idea that what's happening to me, it must be my fault, when it's not. It's a systemic issue. Go knock on your neighbor's door, you'll find out that the issues you're having are also the same issues that your neighbor will have, and the same with someone down the hallway. Or if you live in a single family home and you're renting a basement, the same will happen to your neighbor in the basement down the road, even if they have a different landlord. So I think that's definitely the most powerful tool. Then you have obviously rallies. Landlords have many different interests. It's not just that they do rental housing. Many of them have other investments that you can also target as part of your organizing. And I would say also getting involved politically is important. For many, many years, homeowners control the narrative of what the city is about. And I think part of the work we have to do with the tenant movement is to challenge the narrative. 50% of Toronto are tenants, 30% of Ontario are tenants, and we still don't really get a fair hearing when it comes to main political decisions. So breaking through that is also important.
Sharlene, when you were helping organize your building, what was that experience like for you? Would you maybe have any advice for people who were trying to organize their building?
I'll really say that it changed my perspective on where I lived. I do love my community. I live here with my family. My mom lives in the same building. My husband's lived here since he came from Jamaica in this neighborhood. We are in this neighborhood because of our love of the neighborhood. My children enjoy it. They have lots of friends. They go to school in the neighborhood. Door knocking, you live in a big place. You see people all the time. But really door knocking, having conversations with your neighbors, I got to learn so much about our building. We have folks who have lived here for 40 years. Who would have thought that? You know what I mean? Folks who have raised their family here, who they're there with their spouse and their spouse is no longer here, and they want to remain in their unit because that's home. And then we have folks who've just moved into the neighborhood. There's a lot of convenience in York Southwestern. We have the Up Express, TTC, GO Train, access to the highway. So a lot of folks who are new to Canada come to this neighborhood because it's so vibrant and multicultural. So knocking on doors really helped me understand that you know your neighbors on your floor, right? You live in a big place and you see them coming and going, but really getting to know my neighbors and understanding that housing affects people in a different way, depending on who they are. So how my housing affected me was quite different than my neighbor across the hall from me, right? Speaking to them and really understanding that ultimately we all want somewhere to lay our head, to call home that is free from repairs, free from pests, is affordable, and we can enjoy our community. We all have the same thing in common, but we're reaching those goals differently and at different times.
It's a funny thing that we have our kind of intuitive notion, I think, in terms of how collective power manifests in any city is through suburban homeowners. I think we tend to think of them as having the most political power, which is kind of ironic because it would make a lot more sense for a few hundred people all living in one building. That should be a much easier opportunity to organize and to exercise collective power. And I think that examples like that rent strike, like the Toronto Tenant Union, I think are going to be very helpful for people to recognize, I don't actually need to create a Facebook group like people who live in a suburban community. Sure. I just need to walk out my door and knock on their doors, and you get into this interesting interplay between social media has become this dominant form of how we view political conversation, obviously one that I'm culpable in as well. But when you're willing to actually deal with people one-on-one, you quickly realize it's actually a lot easier to organize than you might expect. Sharlene, how has that political power that you are currently developing, how do you think that has interplayed with the political class? Do you have any observations about, Mayor Olivia Chow and her approach to housing over the course of her tenure?
Well, I must say that a lot of folks in our building when we were on the rent strike had a lot of faith that the mayor could change our situation and forgot that there's a municipal, provincial, and federal governments, right? So, we got this mayor who just got voted in. This mayor is going to help us change our situation because we were on the rent strike when she got elected. And, she has done a lot of announcements and a lot of things have been put into the works to help renters, but renters who are already in units who are really, as we know from door knocking, a lot of folks are suffering and you won't know until you talk to them what they're going through. There's a lot missing. There's a lot of gaps. There's a lot of gaps missing for the average renter in the city. And there's different levels of renters as well. So these are building 400 plus units. Some folks are working class. Some folks are not working. Some folks are stay-at-home moms. We have retirees. We have every type of renter in this building. Our building could be used as a thesis. And to really show that when a rent increase comes that's above the guideline, when the rent increase at the yearly one that the provincial government allows, the allowable is really high. It affects every family differently. It affects the family with a parent on maternity leave differently. It affects the retiree on a fixed income who has no extra money coming in differently. It affects the new immigrant differently. It affects that working class person differently who at the bargaining table didn't get an increase, right? Just bargain to keep their job. All of these things are definitely what affects us politically. And I think that what we did here at 33 King was really inform people on exactly how the system systemically affects how we live in this building. Because it really showed that people had this perception that we could make these AGIs go away if we push back. But pushing back is not enough. Organizing and responding collectively works.
Bruno, what would your analysis of your city councillor be? Who are they and how good of a job do you think they're doing in terms of helping out renters?
I think there's a mix when it comes to city councillors. I will agree with Sharlene that during Mayor Chow's term, there has been a lot more attention to tenants. And there's a few things that the city did that were voted at council that improve marginally, but improve situations. The renovations bylaw, increasing funding to the rent bank, getting more in 311 inspectors or rent safe inspectors are the ones that come through when you have an issue. But I would still think that in general, city
and how
council...
I'm trying to ask you about Frances Nunziata.
Oh, Frances Nunziata. Yeah. No, well,
what kind of job do you think she's been doing? Do you think she's helping out renters effectively?
No, not at all. Nunziata is she's changed her tune on renters basically because of a competitor that has focused on renters issues so much, which is Chiara Padovani. And that has meant that Nunziata has changed what she used to do. Just to give you an example, she just only would visit buildings with the police. And sometimes she will wear like bulletproof jackets.
Is that real?
No, I swear now she's changed.
That's insane.
It's insane. But even now, when she's trying to be more pro-tenant, we can say. She still, every time she organizes a community meeting for a building, she brings in the police, and her whole angle is about crime. When maybe one of the issues, but people are worried about their rents, the conditions, and it's the same kind of frustration. Nunziata shows up with the cops. The cops is like, I don't know, there's been so many thefts here. But then tenants are like, yeah, but my things don't get fixed, and I call 311 a million times, and then she's just kind of clueless on what to do on that. So it's an example of a suburban councillor that never courted or even tried to get the tenant support. And now I think because of the organizing that we've done, Chiara as a competitor as well, honing in on tenants, Nunziata is kind of trying to respond, but very clumsily, I would say. There's some quite incredible scenes to be seen from different moments where Nunziata shows up, and the kind of things that she suggests are very wild.
Yeah, please bring a camera in the next time she has one of those. I feel like that'll be some interesting footage.
I'll give you an example because it is in a documentary that will come out, I think, next year. There's a documentary of the rent strikes. There is this meeting that happens in the buildings on rent strike. Conditions are terrible. Canada Post has not delivered mail for 3 years in this building because the Canada Post workers said that's not safe for us to go into the lobby because of bed bugs and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So she organized a community meeting. Tenants are on rest strike. She organized a community meeting, and she invites as a keynote speaker to this community meeting to this white homeowner guy who is part of something called Crime Stoppers, who is talking about how people need to watch out for their Amazon packages, that one of the ways they can resolve the issues of crime is with lighting their porches better. And this is all tenants in the building. They said, we don't have a porch. Like, what are you talking about? And the meeting explodes in people yelling at this guy, like, why the heck are you here? But I think it's a good representation of where her mindset is at. And at some point, the guy is looking, he looks at the camera and he says, oh, I feel like this is a mob. Well,
yeah, I mean, yeah, kind of in a, in a very classical sense, maybe. Yeah, eventually, if issues aren't resolved, I wonder, Sharlene, when it comes to the things you'd like to see, like what would an ask you would want to see from the councillor candidates, the mayoral candidates? What are some commitments you would like to see from them to give you faith that they care about the rights of tenants?
Oh, wow. That's a good loaded question. So since we know that 50% of Toronto are renters and tenants, we'd love to see candidates win who are actually a renter or a tenant. That would be amazing to have lived experience and a voice in City Hall, because we look at who's sitting in council, and there's not many folks who have had the lived experience that many people out there who are doing amazing work in tenant rights and in different activism and community in City Hall as councillors. That's the first thing. The rent eviction bylaw was a great start, but we need more bylaws that push back against our public land being used for private development. We know that many developers have things on the horizon in many neighborhoods across the city. A lot of communities have already been gentrified and are on their way to be gentrified. And it's displacing folks who look like me, Black and workers of color, Indigenous folks. And where do we go, right? And are these affordable communities like ours here in Weston and others around the city? If we're pushed out of these neighborhoods, where do we go? And when we live and love this city, we're here for a reason, right? So I'd love to see folks come out and speak out about what they want to do to help create change. Displacement is a huge issue in the city. Many people feel like they're being pushed out. Above guideline increases are a tool the provincial governments use to raise rents and to push people out. But what will the city do to counter that, to keep folks like me here? Because where else can I go? I work in the city. My husband works in the city. Where do we go, right? On my journey with this tenant activism, really, how do we take care of our seniors? I don't think anybody in City Hall has really thought about seniors who rent, who are living month to month. The first week of the month is great for them because they have a little bit of money. But once their rent is covered, medication, maybe a life insurance and some bills, they don't have anything, not even to eat. So how are our seniors supposed to be our matriarchs and patriarchs of the community being upheld and being, all the years they gave their blood, sweat, and tears to this city and this country, how are we paying them back? And that's something that I would love to see people really, really address. When we went down and deputed at City Hall, one of the seniors in the building said, not just affordable housing, deeply affordable housing. And that is, I think, ultimately what needs to be done. How do we do it? Financially, I don't know, but it needs to be done because people are suffering. People can't buy their medication. They can't pick up groceries just for one person. And we see it every day in the tenant union.
Bruno, anything you'd add on to that?
I would just say one more thing on the last point about the deeply affordable housing, that I think our political class still doesn't really understand how it's perceived from the tenant side. When they make these announcements about so many units, unless they put a price on how much rent is going to be, every tenant is thinking, this is going to be another shiny building that I cannot move into.
Another glass box.
Another glass box. And even regardless of the size, it's not just they say this is going to be a glass box of 2 to 3 bedrooms. If people cannot afford it, and that's what they're thinking because that's what has happened. And I just always say, even when people announce that this is going to be deeply affordable, you got to say rents here are going to be between this and this, because that's when the real discussion happens. So who can afford $2,000 in rent? Who can afford $2,500? Nobody, no working class person in this city. But without putting a price, it's just the imagination of most people is like, yeah, I'm not going to be able to afford it, because that's what we've seen. Like in the neighborhood, right next to Charlene's building, there is another new building like this, 22 John Street, that also went on rent strike. And it's more or less a third empty, maybe more, just from canvassing it. And the turnover is huge because this is a non-rent control building. It's a luxury rental that was built on public land, given to this developer that's also Charlene's landlord. So we gave public land it has 420 units, out of which 40 are affordable. The rest are market rents that basically nobody in the neighborhood can afford, and probably beyond the neighborhood. So people look at that, and that's the example that they see when they hear these policies. And unfortunately, it does end up being the situation more often than not.
And I can imagine for some of these landlords, having that high turnover is a feature, not a bug. Because when there is high turnover, it's harder for tenants to, develop those relationships that can serve as the foundation for future collective action. So that's why I so appreciate what Toronto Tenant Union is doing, because it's not only pursuing collective action building by building, but recognizing that, every renter in the city is part of a collective body. And I think there's a lot of political power that can come from that. So I thank you both for what you're doing. Wrapping up here, Sharlene, is there anything else you'd want to add? Anything around this conversation that you think, deserves to get some more eyeballs, more ears on?
I'd really like to say to homeowners in neighborhoods like ours, where we're a mixed bag, lots of homeowners, lots of renters, get to know your neighbors. Understand what they're going through. Don't see a sign and think, oh, those folks are just doing something absurd. Really get to know your neighbors, because our children go to school together, our seniors socialize together at the seniors club. We are all the same. We live in the neighborhood and we love our neighborhoods. Really get to know the tenants in your neighborhood, because we bring so much to the neighborhood, just like a homeowner does. I think for a long time, I felt there was a line divided. Homeowner here, tenant here. And I like to think that some of the work that we've done over the years in this community has blurred the line a little bit. But I'd really love to see more homeowners, really talk about it amongst your friends, and really not just say, oh, Chow's coming with another announcement for tenants. Because when you read between the lines, there are a lot of announcements that really don't benefit many tenants. Like, it'd be great for me to move into a bigger unit in a new building right in my own neighborhood, but could we afford it? In all reality, we're two working class folks who make half decent money.
Bruno, anything else you'd like to add?
So Sharlene addressed the homeowners, I'm going to address the tenants. If anybody who listens to this, and no matter where you are, I know that the show probably is listened to beyond Toronto.
I don't know about that. I appreciate the kind words, Bruno.
Let's get it there. Don't worry.
We're manifesting it.
I would say, yes, manifesting it.
I can see there's one listener in Finland, actually. So
exactly, there you go. That's the one you know, but imagine how many more, maybe as many as 5 or 10. But if any of them are tenants, I would say the best path to improve your conditions and to live a better life where you are is to organize with your neighbors. So reach out to the tenant union or to a tenant union. If you don't have one, you should really form one. Just like at work, we need a union. We also need a union at home. So I hope people, get on that as well.
And Sharlene, where can people find out more about the Toronto Tenant Union?
So we are on Instagram at TTU, right? Bruno's TTU? Gosh. What's our Instagram handle?
Toronto Tenant.
Toronto Tenant Union. Oh gosh, we're bad.
If they click Toronto Tenant Union, they'll find us. Yes.
We have a website.
Tenantunion.ca is easy.
Tenantunion.ca is our website. You can join us there and follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, and on what's the one that young kids use? TikTok. See, I don't even know. My kid told me I was on TikTok. I'm like, oh yeah.
I don't post on TikTok anymore. I don't know. So I thank you both so much. All of those links will be posted down below. Tenants Union TO on Instagram as well. Bruno Dobrusin and Sharlene Henry, thank you so much for your time today. I really, really appreciated this, and I'll have to have you on the show sometime in the future. Hopefully, when we've built more affordable housing, we can have a little celebratory podcast one day. All righty. Thank you both so much.
Thanks, Christopher.
Thanks, Christopher. Appreciate it.
Thanks again to Bruno and Sharlene from the Toronto Tenants Union for joining me on the show today. If you like the show, please consider leaving a rating on your preferred podcasting app. You'd be really surprised by how meaningful that is, both to me as well as for any potential person checking out the show. If you'd like to follow along on Instagram, we are at Toronto the Politics the Show. We're also on Blue Sky. And I'll take a quick second to say that yesterday, when you're listening to this, I posted a short little thank you and request to my audience, just talking about the financial realities of trying to do something like this. I'm in a very fortunate position to have parents who will put up with me living in their house. My hope, though, is to build this venture, this content thing I'm doing, podcast, YouTube clips, into something which is self-sufficient. Not only because, I would like to move out of my parents' house, but also because I want to prove my thesis that local news is increasingly important for people. And I hope to demonstrate to other creators out there how they can create a self-sufficient local news content approach. But I need your help. I need help to help experiment and develop, different strategies to accomplish that. My dream is that, this time next year, even in a couple of months, I can help teach other, aspiring podcasters how to do this in their city. How can we have every city in the world, we'll start off with Canada, have this kind of vibrant local news content, a local news content ecosystem. The benefit of moving in with my parents has been I get to watch the news that they watch. And I watch, the CTVs of the world, the city TVs of the world. And I think these channels are spending thousands of dollars a minute to produce something which is, in my opinion, less interesting than the conversations I'm having on this show. So there's money out there, right? There is money out there, but I think the money is just going to the wrong places right now. I think the money is going to these dying approaches towards local news. So how can we have it so that instead of, it's Rogers and Bell hoarding all this money to pay executives and these really complex staffs and these, people selling ads. And how can we instead have all that money, and there's money out there, go towards independent creators in Toronto, in Vancouver, in Montreal, in Calgary, in Edmonton, in Hamilton even? How can we have all that money go from these fat cats who work at Rogers and have that distributed to a more dynamic, a more interesting, more equitable local news ecosystem? But I need your help. I need your help not only today, to help me figure out how to do that, but I need your ongoing support. So if you think that is an interesting problem to solve and you want to solve it with me, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/TTPTS. Those are the letters. That's the initials for Toronto the Politics, the show. buymeacoffee.com/TTPTS. And you can help me out. And we can figure out how to build a better local news ecosystem. Not just for Toronto, but let's prove the case. Also, it's okay if you don't want to give me money. I need something to work towards. Thank you to everyone who has donated so far. It's I I broke down in tears when I saw someone donated $5 to me. And then some other people came in with some like very generous donations that the tears just kept flowing. I'm a crier. You'll see that as more of these episodes are released. There'll be plenty of a tear shed. So thank you to everyone who's supported so far, and to people who, are considering supporting, and thank you to everyone who's just listening. That means a lot too. On some episodes I have released, on a lot of these episodes, a substantial amount of listeners are like high school aged. And I think that's really cool. Like I if you're a teenager really interested about local politics, that's sick. And I really wish when I was your age, I had my shit together enough to be thinking about our municipal politics. I think when I was 17, I was primarily concerned with, solving algebra equations. So yeah, anyways, but also like thanks to my 70-year-old listeners and everyone in between. This has been the craziest month of my life. I still feel like I'm kind of in a wind tunnel trying to set up a house of cards. To everyone who said anything nice to me, thank you. Let's keep doing this. It is Wednesday, August 12th when this episode is released. There's a municipal election coming up pretty soon. You should go vote when it happens. Also, bring a friend along to vote. Someone asked me, what does success look like for me for this podcast? It's easy. For Toronto to have the highest turnout of any election in the city's history this year. That's what success would look like to me. So let's make it happen. My name is Christopher Chesson. I'm Toronto the Politics, the show, the host, as well as Toronto the Politics, the show, the producer. If you have any thoughts you'd like to get to me, any other inquiries, you can reach me at torontothepoliticsshow@gmail.com. Thanks for stopping by. Be kind to each other. Bye-bye.